The Galactic Assembly had gathered in its grand chamber, a vast cathedral of glass and resonant alloys suspended above the orbit of a red giant. Voices overlapped in hundreds of dialects, sharp consonants clashing with melodic tones, all threaded to the universal translators into a chorus of tension. The subject at hand was singular: humanity. Some speakers labeled them volatile primitives, unfit to join the consortium of ancient civilizations. Others argued that their sudden leap to faster-than-light travel, achieved without borrowed knowledge, could not be ignored. No one in the chamber denied that humanity had become a question the galaxy needed answered. Ambassador Alira Ven sat among the delegation of the Iridos Collective, her silver eyes reflecting the chamber's shifting light. To her people, balance was sacred, order necessary, and humanity represented the opposite, disorder woven into flesh. Yet the task assigned to her was clear: travel to Earth, observe, and determine whether these unpredictable beings were to be admitted or excluded. It was not a mission she welcomed, but one she accepted with the quiet diligence her kind were known for. The first human she encountered was unlike the distant reports filled with statistics and cautionary warnings. Dr. Marcus Hale greeted her on the landing pad with an awkward bow and an eager smile, as if he were welcoming not a wary envoy but an old friend. He was taller than she expected, his movements slightly unrefined, but his eyes carried a quickness she recognized, curiosity sharpened by necessity. He apologized for the weather, though the storm-torn sky seemed to thrill him, lightning etching wild patterns across the horizon. "You'll never quite get used to it," he said with a laugh, "but you'll never want to leave it behind either." Their conversations during the days that followed were both illuminating and unsettling. Marcus spoke of Earth's history with a frankness that unsettled her. Wars fought, mistakes repeated, tragedies endured. Yet he always framed them as foundations for resilience, scars turned into lessons. To Alira, it was paradoxical. In her culture, scars meant imbalance and failure, not progress. Humanity seemed to draw strength not from harmony, but from fracture. She studied their technology with equal parts skepticism and reluctant admiration. Their faster-than-light drive was a crude, unstable creation by galactic standards, cobbled together through improvisation rather than centuries of refinement. Yet it worked, and in its reckless efficiency lay a truth she could not dismiss. Humans had achieved what other civilizations consider impossible not through conformity, but through relentless trial, error, and sheer audacity. On the third evening, as twilight bled into a night scattered with stars, Marcus led her through a city alive with motion. Markets buzzed with voices, musicians played improvised rhythms, and people argued in the streets with fiery conviction. What struck Alira most was not the chaos, but the undercurrent of energy, a refusal to be still, to surrender, to accept limits. It was exhausting to her ordered senses, yet also compelling. News arrived while they stood overlooking the sea, transmitted through secure channels from the assembly itself. The Kethri Dominion, a ruthless expansionist power long kept at bay by fragile treaties, had mobilized fleets toward neutral colonies. Fear swept through the assembly's ranks. For Alira's people and many others, war meant decades of preparation, caution, and collective decision. Humanity, untested on the galactic stage, was deemed unsuitable for involvement. Admission was delayed. Exclusion was implied. Marcus read the message beside her, his jaw tightening, his fingers curling into fists. "So they'll sit and wait," he muttered, bitterness lacing his voice, "while others burn." She explained the assembly's logic, the need for caution, for measured responses. He turned toward her, eyes burning with something she had no word for, a mixture of defiance and conviction. "We don't wait while others die," he said softly, but the softness carried more weight than any shouted command. That night, Alira recorded her first report to the collective. She wrote of contradictions. Humans as reckless innovators, compassionate yet brutal, survivors who thrived in chaos. She admitted she had not yet decided whether they belonged among the stars or posed a danger too great to risk. Yet as she closed the report, she found her thoughts circling back not to the assembly, not to the Dominion threat, but to Marcus's words. The following morning, he stood before a small gathering of Earth's leaders and scientists, with Alira observing from the shadows. His proposal was clear. Humanity would not wait for permission to defend others. They would stand against the Dominion, not because it was strategically sound or politically beneficial, but because it was necessary. His audience was divided, some fearful, others emboldened, but the idea had already taken root. Humans were not asking for inclusion. They were declaring their intent to act regardless of approval. Elira watched the moment unfold with unease and reluctant admiration. She had been sent to decide whether humanity was ready for the assembly. Now she began to wonder if the assembly was ready for humanity. The storm returned that evening, the sky once again alive with lightning. Marcus stood beneath it, rain soaking his jacket, gazing upward with the stubborn resolve of a creature daring the universe itself to strike him down. Elira joined him, silent, her thoughts restless. For the first time, she questioned not whether humanity belonged, but whether the galaxy could afford to dismiss them. Section 1 closes with a storm raging, Earth trembling with both danger and promise. Elira understood that the decision before her had grown far larger than her own people's doctrine of balance. Humanity's entrance into the galactic stage was no longer a matter of if. It was a matter of how violently and how soon. The assembly chamber pulsed with indignation when news of humanity's declaration spread. Delegates hissed, chittered, and intoned accusations across the hall, their voices weaving into a tapestry of alarm. To them, the prospect of humans marching into a galactic war uninvited was not bravery, but hubris. Elira stood silently among her peers, her features calm, though within her thoughts churned. She had seen enough of Marcus Hale to know that this was not mere posturing. Humans would act because inaction was unbearable to them, even if it meant standing alone. Marcus had little patience for political theatrics. Where others wove layers of caution and protocol, he cut through with blunt determination. To Elira, it bordered on recklessness, yet it was difficult to dismiss results. Within weeks, human engineers and pilots were integrating themselves into the outskirts of Allied fleets. Their methods unsettled the established order. Where Irido's tacticians calculated probabilities with meticulous precision, human crews improvised with alarming creativity. They modified ships in ways no sanctioned protocol allowed, often violating the very safety measures the assembly considered sacred. Still, their vessel performed admirably, if unpredictably, in simulations. What alarmed Elira's colleagues inspired a reluctant respect in her. The first real test arrived without warning. Kethri raiders descended upon a border station, its defenses woefully insufficient. By the time the assembly's fleets mobilized, the station would have been ash and silence. Humanity, however, did not wait. Marcus and his contingent of pilots launched their small, unproven crafts directly into the chaos. Elira observed from the safety of a command vessel, her silver gaze fixed on the human formation weaving through Kethri fire with unnerving audacity. They did not adhere to standard battle patterns. Instead, they darted, feigned retreat, and then struck at vulnerable flanks with startling accuracy. It was not clean warfare. Several human vessels were lost in the first engagement. They remained scattering in the void like fractured jewels. Yet their determination did not falter. Marcus himself, piloting a retrofitted interceptor, rallied his companions with bursts of sharp, confident orders. Each time the enemy pressed harder, the humans adapted, creating solutions in the moment rather than clinging to established doctrine. By the time reinforcements arrived, the raiders were retreating, harried, and diminished. The station survived. Elira found herself replaying the battle in her mind long after it ended. The losses were grievous, yet the humans bore them differently than the species she knew. Aliens mourned with solemn ceremony, balancing grief with ritual to restore order. Humans, she discovered, carried grief like a forge carries fire. It burned, but it also fueled. Marcus stood among the survivors, his jaw set, his eyes shadowed by pain, yet his voice remained steady. "We can't let their deaths mean nothing," he told his crew, and in that phrase Elira heard both a eulogy and a vow. Doubt spread among the assembly. Some demanded humanity's expulsion from the effort, citing recklessness. Others whispered that perhaps humanity's unpredictability was precisely what the war demanded. The Kethri Dominion did not fight by rules. They struck where defense was weakest, exploited hesitation, and thrived on fear. Against such an enemy, rigid strategies faltered. Perhaps chaos answered chaos. Elira wrestled with her own judgment. Her training urged caution, reminding her that balance required control, yet what she had seen defied those tenets. Humans survived because they refused to submit, even when order dissolved. It unsettled her to admit, but their very flaws seemed to be their strength. Tension sharpened as reports revealed a new Kethri offensive, this time aimed at a neutral world whose population had no means of defense. The assembly convened in desperate debate, yet resolution eluded them. Caution outweighed urgency. The fleets remained anchored, their leaders unwilling to gamble resources without consensus. Elira listened in quiet frustration until Marcus's voice cut across the chamber's confusion. He had been granted no floor, yet his words carried regardless. "You talk of waiting," he said, standing with unflinching posture, his voice resonant despite the translator's mechanical cadence. "You talk of balance and probabilities, while people are about to be slaughtered. If you won't act, we will. Humanity won't stand by and watch." His declaration drew gasps, hisses, and growls from the gathered delegates, but Elira could not look away from him. His tone was not defiant for the sake of defiance. It was a statement of simple fact. For Marcus, hesitation equaled complicity. Later, in private, she confronted him. "You shame the assembly before its own counselors," she said, her voice even though her chest tightened with unspoken conflict. "You risk fracturing what fragile unity remains." He met her gaze, unyielding. "And what unity is that if it means standing idle while innocents die? You call us reckless. Maybe we are, but better reckless than cowards." Elira had no answer. Her silence admitted what she could not say aloud, that his words unsettled her because they struck a chord she wished to deny. Preparations for the next offensive began not because the assembly authorized them, but because humanity refused to wait. Their ships, few but fiercely manned, took to the void with grim determination. Against them, the Kethri loomed vast and merciless. Elira found herself aboard a joint command vessel, drawn not by obligation, but by a compulsion she did not fully understand. She told herself it was duty, yet in her heart she knew it was curiosity, perhaps even hope. As the fleet advanced, silence gripped the corridors, broken only by the rhythm of engines and the whispers of anticipation. Elira stood beside Marcus at the observation deck, stars spilling endlessly before them. His expression was calm, but not detached. It carried the weight of lives, choices, and consequences. "You know," he said quietly, eyes never leaving the distant points of light, "we may not come back from this. But if we don't try, then what are we worth?" Elira did not respond immediately. Instead, she studied him, a man who embodied everything her people had been taught to mistrust: impulsiveness, passion, defiance. Yet here, facing annihilation, those same qualities felt less like flaws and more like weapons. The fleet entered contested space, the enemy's presence looming like a shadow across the stars. In that moment, Elira understood that the true conflict was not merely between the Assembly and the Dominion, but within herself. The struggle between balance and chaos, caution and courage, doctrine and truth. When the first flashes of enemy fire lit the void, there was no more time for deliberation. Humanity had already chosen its path, and she, almost without realizing, had chosen to follow. Would you like me to keep the final beat of Section 2 more triumphant, humans winning a surprising victory, or more tense, battle unresolved, leading into Section 3? The void erupted with fire and silence, each explosion blooming against the black canvas of space like violent stars. The Kethri fleet pressed forward with ruthless precision, their ships bristling with armaments designed to overwhelm and annihilate. The Assembly's forces faltered under the relentless assault, their rigid formations collapsing as panic threaded through disciplined ranks. In the chaos, it was humanity that refused to break. Marcus Hale's voice cut through the comms, crisp, urgent, and unyielding, binding together crews who had never fought side by side. Improvisation became strategy. Desperation became resolve. Where order crumbled, humanity's chaos thrived. Elira watched from the command deck, every nerve taut as she tracked the human maneuvers. She saw Marcus's small squadron dive where no rational commander would dare, weaving through debris and enemy fire to strike, at weak points the Assembly's analysts had dismissed as insignificant. His tactics defied the doctrines of her people, yet the results were undeniable. With every reckless maneuver, the Kethri faltered, their calculated patterns disrupted by unpredictability. For the first time, the Dominion hesitated, but victory carried cost. Human ships ignited in searing bursts, their crews sacrificing themselves with grim determination. The comms filled with last transmissions, voices breaking but resolute. Farewell spoken with the conviction that their deaths would mean survival for others. Elira felt those words like a weight pressing against her chest. To her kind, loss was a disruption of balance, something mourned in silence. To humans, loss was a spark that ignited fiercer resistance. She found herself shaken by the rawness of it, by the way Marcus bore grief and fury together, as if they were fuel for his next strike. The battle's turning point came when the Dominion prepared a devastating barrage aimed at the heart of the Allied fleet. Alien commanders hesitated, their algorithms screaming the impossibility of survival. Marcus acted before hesitation could calcify into defeat. His plan was audacious. Lure the Kethri into overextending, then cripple their flagship, a maneuver so perilous it bordered on suicide. Elira listened as he outlined the scheme, her pulse quickening at the sheer madness of it. If we fail, he said over the comms, then we fail fighting, not waiting. She should have protested, should have counseled caution. Yet the words died in her throat. Something inside her shifted, a recognition that balance alone could not preserve life, that sometimes survival demanded imbalance, demanded risk. She watched Marcus lead the charge, his battered interceptor streaking ahead of the fleet, a lone ember against a vast blaze of enemy fire. Others followed, emboldened not by orders but by belief. The clash was brutal. Marcus's squadron tore through the Dominion's defenses, their ships vanishing one by one until only a handful remained. Elira gripped the railing so tightly her knuckles whitened, breath held as the human commander dove into the heart of the enemy formation. At the last instant, he released a storm of destabilizing charges, detonating them in the vulnerable arteries of the Dominion's flagship. The explosion ripped through its core, a blinding cascade of fire that tore the enemy fleet into disarray. Silence followed, heavy and absolute. Then the tide shifted. With their flagship crippled, the Dominion retreated, their once cohesive advance unraveling into scattered withdrawal. Cheers erupted across the comms. Disbelief mingled with relief. The Allied fleet had survived, though the cost was carved into every empty seat and every silent channel. Elira found Marcus in the aftermath, his face streaked with exhaustion, his body carrying the marks of strain and battle. Yet his eyes still burned, not with triumph but with the weight of what had been lost. She stood before him, words caught between gratitude and unease. At last she said, "You turned chaos into victory, but at what cost?" He met her gaze without flinching. Cost is the price of survival. The question is whether we pay it willingly or let others pay it for us. His voice carried no arrogance, only weary certainty. Elira felt something within her surrender to the truth she had resisted. Humanity's flaws were not weaknesses to be corrected, but strengths born of necessity. The Assembly convened once more, this time in an atmosphere transformed by urgency and awe. Delegates who had once spoken of humanity with contempt now spoke with wary respect. Elira presented her testimony, her words deliberate but unshaken. She described what she had witnessed. Not reckless savages, but a species that thrived in adversity, that found possibility in impossibility, that fought not for conquest, but because they could not abide in action. They are dangerous, she concluded, her silver eyes scanning the chamber. But their danger is not their flaw. It is their gift. And without them, we are weaker. The decision was not unanimous, but it was decisive. Humanity was granted full membership in the Assembly, their seat carved not by diplomacy, but by blood and resolve. The announcement spread across the galaxy, sparking debate, fear, and hope in equal measure. For Elira, it marked not an end but a beginning, a recognition that the balance of the cosmos had shifted, and that humanity was now part of its weight. Later, as the chamber emptied and stars glimmered beyond the crystalline walls, Marcus stood beside her, He carried himself not as a victor, but as a man already measuring the road ahead. "This is just the start," he said quietly, as if speaking to himself as much as to her. "The galaxy isn't ready for us, but we'll make it ready." Elira turned toward him, studying the defiance etched into every line of his face, the resilience that no battle could strip away. For the first time, she allowed herself to smile, faint but genuine. "Perhaps," she replied, "the galaxy needs what it isn't ready for." Beyond them, the stars burned indifferent, yet somehow brighter. The storm that had begun on Earth now echoed across the heavens, carried by a species unwilling to wait, unwilling to yield. Humanity had entered the stage not as supplicants, but as catalysts, and the galaxy would never be the same. The chamber of the assembly still resonated with the echoes of humanity's admission, but the air was far from celebratory. Fear lingered behind the formal applause. A tension coiled around every gesture and whispered conversation. Humanity had won its place, yet its presence had unsettled the fragile order of the stars. Some delegates whispered that the victory against the Dominion was chance, an anomaly of reckless fortune. Others suspected it heralded the dawn of an era they could not control. Elira listened, noting the tremors beneath their words. What none of them admitted openly was that the Ketheri had not been destroyed, only repelled. The storm had not passed. It had shifted. Marcus Hale bore the weight of that truth more heavily than most. He moved through the assembly's halls with the air of a man tolerated but not welcomed, his every step watched by eyes that searched for flaws. His voice carried influence now, but also suspicion. To the veterans of the Galactic Council, he was a disruption embodied in flesh. To his own people, he had become something he never intended, a symbol. That burden wore at him, though he concealed it behind his characteristic steadiness. Elira, who had learned to read the unspoken, saw the fatigue etched into his posture and the silence between his words. Their bond had grown in ways she had not expected, forged not by friendship alone, but by shared survival. She found herself drawn to his side, though not out of obligation. He unsettled her, yes, but he also illuminated something she had long denied. That balance was not found in perfect stillness, but in motion, in the constant adjustment to shifting weight. Marcus embodied that principle without naming it, living it with each impossible choice. The Dominion's response was swift. Intercepted transmissions revealed plans for a concentrated strike not on a colony, but on the assembly itself. It was audacity bordering on madness, a move designed to shatter the fragile coalition and scatter its members into isolated survival. Panic consumed the delegates when the intelligence was confirmed. Protocols dictate evacuation and dispersal, the preservation of knowledge over lives. Marcus opposed it immediately. "You scatter now," he warned, "and you'll never gather again. They won't just take your homes. They'll take your will to resist." His words fell into silence. The assembly caught between instinctive caution and a dawning recognition that he might be right. Elira watched the debate unfold, her people's representatives arguing for preservation, others calling for retreat. In that moment, she realized the central conflict had shifted. The Dominion was still a threat, but the true battle was for conviction, for the will to stand rather than scatter. She could not remain silent. Rising from her seat, she spoke with uncharacteristic force, her voice cutting across the chamber. She reminded them of what she had witnessed, of what humanity had endured. "If they are reckless," she said, "then let us learn their recklessness. If they are flawed, then let us borrow their flaws. Because those flaws have saved us where our perfection would have doomed us." Her words carried weight not because of eloquence, but because they came from a voice once skeptical. The assembly fractured further, but hesitation was dangerous. Marcus turned to Elira in private later, his jaw tight. "They'll debate until the Dominion arrives. We don't have that time." His plan was as audacious as ever. Use humanity's smaller fleet as bait, draw the Dominion into overcommitment, and then strike with coordinated force from the allied navies. It was desperate, perilous, and deeply human. Elira questioned it, not because it was reckless, but because it required trust the assembly had not yet granted. "They'll never agree," she said softly. Marcus's response was calm but unyielding. "Then we move before they can stop us." When the Dominion fleet emerged, dark silhouettes blotting the stars, humanity was already in motion. Their ships streaked forward, fragile against the enormity of the enemy, but resolute. Panic erupted in the assembly, accusations flying. Yet as the first volleys of fire lit the void, the truth became undeniable. The humans had drawn the Dominion into the open, and now the others had a choice: remain spectators to their destruction or seize the chance carved for them. One by one, alien fleets joined the fray, hesitantly at first, then with gathering momentum, until the stars themselves seemed ablaze with defiance. The battle was brutal. The Dominion fought with merciless coordination, their weapons tearing through defenses, but the combined fleets held. Marcus's strategy worked not because it was perfect, but because it allowed for imperfection. Ships faltered, plans fractured, yet humanity adapted in cracks, turning failure into opportunity. Elira observed in awe, her heart pounding not with fear, but with recognition. This was not chaos. This was resilience incarnate. The Dominion was forced to retreat once more, their ambition thwarted not by overwhelming might, but by a coalition that had discovered new strength in humanity's example. Losses scarred the Allied fleets, yet the assembly had stood its ground. When the chamber reconvened, it was no longer fractured by fear. The voices that once derided humanity now spoke with grudging admiration. What began as tolerance had transformed into respect. In the aftermath, Elira found Marcus in the quiet of an observation deck, the stars stretching endlessly before them. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back, shoulders heavy but unbowed. She joined him, their silence speaking louder than words. Finally, he said, "They'll still fear us. Maybe they always will." Elira considered his words before answering. Fear is not the same as rejection. Sometimes it is the beginning of respect. She turned her gaze to the stars, the weight of what lay ahead settling over her. The Dominion will return. Others may rise. But the assembly will not scatter again. Not after this. Marcus glanced at her, a faint smile breaking through his fatigue. Then maybe we've done something right. The stars beyond burned steady, their indifferent light watching over civilizations bound by fragile alliances and fragile hope. Humanity's arrival had not brought peace nor certainty. It had brought something far more dangerous and far more vital: change. Elira felt it deep within her, the knowledge that the galaxy had stepped into a new era, one where balance was no longer measured by stillness, but by the capacity to endure motion without breaking. The conflict was not over. It had only evolved. Yet as she stood beside Marcus, watching the silent sea of light, she felt for the first time that survival was not merely possible. It was inevitable, so long as humanity was among them.